Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, take just 1 second to support the channel by hitting subscribe and turning on the notification bell so you never miss our newest dramatic stories. It is completely free, but your support helps us keep bringing you more emotional twists, unforgettable characters, and powerful endings. And before we begin, I want to hear what you think. Describe this video with just one word in the comments. That word could be shocking, emotional, heartbreaking, satisfying, or anything this story truly makes you feel. Thank you for being here and supporting the channel. Now, let us meet our main character. Sign the agreement, Mr. Callahan, and my son is yours. Gavin Whitaker thought he had misunderstood his father until the contract slid across the walnut table and stopped directly in front of Reed Callahan. Outside the private windows of Callahan Club, November rain blurred downtown Chicago into streaks of silver and amber, but inside the room, everything was painfully clear. Gavin stood beside his father with one hand wrapped around the graphite grip of his forearm crutch, his small overnight bag resting near his shoes. He had been told this meeting concerned Whitaker Distribution's debt. He had been told his signature might be needed because he had handled company records. No one had mentioned that the family intended to offer him as part of the payment. Across the table, Reed Callahan did not reach for the pen. The Alpha Mafia Boss sat in complete stillness, dressed in a charcoal suit that seemed almost black beneath the warm lighting. His dark eyes moved from the contract to Gavin's father, then finally to Gavin himself. The attention made Gavin straighten instinctively. People usually looked first at his crutch, then at the way he favored his left leg, then decided what kind of person he must be. Reed looked directly at his face. "Explain the condition," Reed said. Gavin's father folded his hands. "The remaining balance disappears, and Gavin stays under your protection. Permanently, if necessary." Daniel, Gavin's older brother, stood near the window as though they were discussing warehouse inventory. "He is quiet," Daniel added. "Educated enough to be useful. He will not cause problems." Gavin felt something cold settle beneath his ribs. Useful, quiet, no trouble. Those were the words his family used when they wanted to describe him without admitting they had never learned who he was. Since the accident at 13 left lasting nerve damage in his left leg, every decision had gradually been made for him. His brothers went away to college. Gavin was told travel would be difficult. His brothers joined the family company. Gavin was given bookkeeping work in a back office because it was supposedly safer. They called it protection until Gavin stopped noticing how much of his life had disappeared behind that word. Reed opened the contract and read several pages without speaking. Gavin's father smiled as if silence meant agreement. "This solves everything," he said. "For everyone." Gavin finally found his voice. "Not for me." Daniel turned sharply. "Gavin, do not start." Reed's eyes lifted. Daniel stopped speaking. The room became so quiet that Gavin could hear rain tapping against the glass 30 floors above the city. Reed closed the contract. "There is a problem." Gavin's father frowned. "The terms are generous." "That is not the problem." Reed rested one hand over the unsigned page. "You are offering me control over someone who has not spoken for himself." His father gave a dismissive breath. "He is my Omega son. This is a family decision." Something changed in Reed's expression, subtle but unmistakable. His jaw tightened. His gaze returned to Gavin. "Did you agree to this?" Gavin froze. The question was almost painfully simple. He could not remember the last time his father had asked what he wanted before announcing what would happen next. "Mr. Callahan," his father interrupted. "Gavin understands what is necessary." Reed never looked away from Gavin. "I did not ask you." Gavin's fingers tightened around the crutch. He expected Daniel to interrupt again. He expected his father to answer for him. Reed simply waited. For once, silence did not feel like pressure. It felt like space. Gavin swallowed and forced himself to meet those dark, unreadable eyes. "No," he said. His voice was quiet, but it did not shake. "I did not agree." Reed nodded once, then pushed the contract back across the table without signing it. Gavin's father stared at him. "What are you doing?" Reed leaned back, his expression settling into controlled calm. "Now that I know your son is here against his will, we can stop pretending he is the payment." He looked at the Whitakers one by one before his gaze returned to Gavin. "And we can discuss what your family is actually trying to sell me." Reed's last sentence seemed to expose something none of the Whitakers wanted named. Gavin watched his father's expression tighten, watched Daniel turn away from the windows, and finally looked directly at him. Not with concern, with calculation. That frightened Gavin more than anger would have. For years, he had been easy to ignore. After the accident, his world had grown smaller one decision at a time. At 13, he learned how to balance his weight differently, how to move through crowded hallways with a forearm crutch, and how quickly adults could confuse limitation with helplessness. By 16, his brothers were talking about colleges in other states while Gavin was told staying close to home would be more practical. By 18, Daniel had a corner office at Whitaker Distribution and Gavin had a desk near the records room, where no one minded if he worked quietly because no one believed quiet work could matter. So Gavin made it matter. He studied bookkeeping online at night. He learned how vendor codes repeated, how shipping invoices revealed patterns, how numbers could contradict the people who entered them. Numbers did not pity him. Numbers did not tell him what he could handle. They simply told the truth if someone was patient enough to listen. Reed opened the contract again, but this time his attention seemed less interested in the language about Gavin and more interested in the financial exhibits attached behind it. You said Gavin handled company records, he said. Gavin's father answered too quickly. Basic clerical work. Gavin looked at him. I reconciled vendor accounts for 11 months. Daniel gave a short, irritated breath. You filed paperwork. I found duplicate invoices. The room went still. His father turned toward him. Gavin continued before courage could leave him. North Meridian Supply billed us twice under different reference numbers. Lakefront Freight used nearly the same mailing address. I asked about it in March. Daniel's face changed. Only slightly, but Gavin saw it. Reed saw it too. What happened after you asked? Reed said. My access disappeared 2 days later. Gavin's father leaned forward. You were confused. There was a system update. There was no update. Gavin heard his own voice becoming steadier. Everyone else kept access. Daniel's hand flattened against the table. This is not relevant. Reed looked at him. That is for me to decide. The Alpha Mafia Boss spoke quietly, but the room obeyed him anyway. Gavin felt something unfamiliar move through his chest. Not safety exactly. Not yet. But space. Reed turned one of the attached pages toward Gavin. Do you recognize these account numbers? Gavin lowered his gaze. Several lines blurred at first, then sharpened. One account number pulled at his memory immediately. He had seen it beside handwritten notes in his father's study, months before his system access vanished. Yes, he said. His father went pale. Daniel interrupted. He does not know what he is looking at. Gavin looked up. Then why did you pack my bag before bringing me here? Daniel said nothing. The overnight bag near Gavin's feet suddenly felt heavier than it had 10 minutes earlier. He had assumed the family expected the meeting to run late. Now he understood they had never planned to take him home. Reed closed the file. Interesting. Gavin's father stood. We have explained the terms. Either accept them or refuse them. I am refusing the part involving your son, Reed said. The financial issue remains. Then we are done here. Gavin's father turned toward him. Come on, Gavin. The command was automatic, familiar, almost comforting in its predictability. Gavin shifted his hand on the graphite grip of his crutch, but before he could move, Reed asked, Do you want to leave with them? Gavin froze. Again, the question belonged only to him. His father scoffed. Of course he does. Reed did not look away from Gavin. I asked him. Gavin stared at the man across the table, then at Daniel, then at the bag packed without his knowledge. The truth arrived slowly, and then all at once. They had not brought him because he was worthless. They had brought him because they were afraid of what he knew. Gavin lifted his chin. No, he said. His father's expression hardened. Gavin. He ignored him. For the first time in years, being noticed did not feel like being judged. It felt like becoming dangerous in exactly the way his family had tried to prevent. I think I know why they wanted me out of the house. Gavin's father stared at him as if the sentence itself were an act of betrayal. Daniel recovered first. You are imagining things, he said. Gavin almost laughed. For years, that had been the family answer whenever he noticed something inconvenient. You are tired. You misunderstood. Let us handle it. But the account numbers on Reed's table were real, and so was the overnight bag packed without his knowledge. Gavin shifted his weight carefully, feeling the familiar pull through his left leg, and looked directly at his father. Did you know I copied some of the records? His father's silence answered before his mouth did. Reed noticed. He opened the contract again and turned to the section that described Gavin's residence and obligations after the debt settlement. His eyes moved across the page once. Then he placed both hands on the paper. The sound of tearing paper cut through the room. Gavin watched as Reed separated the clause from the rest of the agreement and placed the torn pieces neatly on the table. "This part does not exist anymore," Reed said. Daniel stepped forward. "You cannot just change a signed agreement." Reed looked at him. "I have not signed anything." Daniel stopped. Reed turned to Gavin's father. "Your debt remains. Your son does not belong to it." The words were simple, but Gavin felt them somewhere deep in his chest. His father's expression hardened. "Then there is nothing left to discuss." He reached for his coat. "Gavin, get your bag." Gavin did not move. His father looked at him again. "We are leaving." That old instinct returned immediately, the one Gavin hated because it had been trained into him so thoroughly. Avoid conflict. Do not make things difficult. Follow first, question later. His fingers tightened around the graphite grip of his crutch. Reed could have interrupted. He could have ordered the Whitakers out. Instead, he remained silent until Gavin looked toward him. "You said you do not want to go with them," Reed said. "That choice still belongs to you." Gavin swallowed. "If I stay, what happens?" "You stay tonight if you want. Tomorrow you decide again." "And if I leave this building?" "No one from my organization will stop you." Gavin searched Reed's face for the trap. There was none he could see. "Why?" Reed's expression barely changed. "Because refusing to sell yourself should not create another owner." Gavin's father gave an impatient breath. "This is ridiculous. He cannot manage on his own." Reed's gaze shifted toward him, colder now. "He appears to be managing this conversation better than you are." Gavin almost smiled, but the ache behind his ribs was too sharp. His father turned back to him. "You are coming home." Gavin thought about the locked filing room, his deleted account access, the notebook hidden inside his old bookkeeping textbook. He thought about every time someone had called control protection until he stopped recognizing the difference. "No," Gavin said. His father's face went still. Gavin forced himself to continue. "I am staying tonight." Daniel shook his head. "You have no idea who you are trusting." Gavin looked at Reed. "I am not trusting him yet." Reed's eyes sharpened, and Gavin realized the answer had not offended him. If anything, it seemed to earn his respect. "Good," Reed said. "You should not." The Whitakers left 10 minutes later, taking their coats, their explanations, and the expectation that Gavin would follow. The door closed behind them. For several seconds, Gavin simply stood there, listening to the quiet. Reed gathered the remaining pages of the contract, but did not touch Gavin's bag. "There is a guest suite upstairs," he said. "It has elevator access, a walk-in shower, and enough space to move comfortably. The door locks from the inside." Gavin looked at him. "You already have an accessible suite?" "Yes." "You did not arrange it because of me?" "No." That answer mattered more than Gavin expected. He was tired of accommodations being treated like favors that required gratitude. Reed picked up one folder and left the rest where Gavin could see them. "There is one more thing." Gavin waited. Reed tapped the financial exhibits. "If what you remember is accurate, your family did not bring you here because they thought you were useless." Gavin felt the truth settle over him again, colder this time. Reed held his gaze. "They brought you here because they were afraid you were useful to the wrong person." The guest suite should have felt temporary, but nothing about it looked improvised. Gavin stood just inside the doorway, studying the wide path between the furniture, the low bed, and the bathroom beyond with its walk-in shower and built-in bench. His hand remained around the graphite grip of his forearm crutch, though the ache in his left leg had begun to ease now that he was no longer standing in the conference room under his family's attention. Reed remained in the hallway several feet away. He had not entered. "You can lock the door from inside," he said. Gavin glanced at him. "And from outside?" "No. No security override. Building security can access the suite during an emergency, but no one is authorized to enter for me." Gavin looked back at the room. He had spent years hearing that restrictions were necessary for his safety. Somehow, Reed Callahan had explained an actual safety measure without turning it into authority over Gavin's life. "You really had this room before tonight?" Gavin asked. "Yes." "Why?" Reed seemed almost puzzled by the question. "Because people with different mobility needs use this building." Gavin lowered his gaze for a moment. At home, adding a handrail beside the basement steps had become a 3-week argument about expense. Here, accessibility was treated as part of the architecture, not a favor. There is a phone on the table, Reed continued. It is yours while you are here. No tracking software from my organization. Call whoever you want. Gavin noticed a new smartphone beside a key card. Including my family? If you want. And if I do not, then do not. The answer came so easily that Gavin almost distrusted it more than a command. He stepped farther into the room, and his left foot caught slightly against the edge of the rug. His balance shifted. Reed moved one step forward, then stopped before touching him. Do you want help? Gavin steadied himself against the crutch. For a second, he could only stare. Most people reached first and apologized later. His father grabbed his elbow whenever stairs appeared, even when Gavin had asked him repeatedly not to. Daniel sometimes took the crutch itself, claiming he was only trying to make things easier. Reed waited. No, Gavin said. I am fine. Reed stepped back immediately. Something in Gavin's chest loosened. You always ask? Reed's expression stayed composed. When someone has not given me permission, yes. Gavin moved to the chair near the window and sat. Chicago stretched beneath him, wet streets reflecting headlights through the rain. Reed remained by the doorway. You could have taken the deal, Gavin said. My father clearly thought you would. Your father made several assumptions. Are they all wrong? A faint pause followed. Probably not. Gavin almost smiled. That is not reassuring. I am not trying to reassure you with lies. Reed's bluntness should have bothered him. Instead, it felt strangely clean. Gavin looked toward the folder still in Reed's hand. The records. Reed followed his gaze. They can wait until tomorrow. I remember more. That caught Reed's attention. Gavin leaned back carefully. North Meridian was not the only vendor. There were at least 3 others. Payments moved every few weeks, usually after larger deposits came into Whitaker distribution. I thought someone was hiding losses. And now I think someone was moving money. Reed said nothing for several seconds. Would you be willing to look at the records with me tomorrow? Gavin noticed the wording immediately. Not you will. Not I need you to. Would you be willing? Yes, he said. Reed nodded once. Then we start in the morning. He turned to leave. Gavin looked at the unlocked doorway, then called his name. Reed. The Alpha stopped. What happens if I decide tomorrow that I want nothing to do with any of this? Reed met his eyes. Then I arrange transportation wherever you choose to go, and the investigation continues without you. Gavin searched his expression again. You would really let me walk away? Gavin, if you cannot leave, then staying means nothing. Reed stepped into the hallway and began to close the door, leaving Gavin with the quiet room, the new phone, and a choice no one had made for him. For the first time that night, Gavin realized the most unsettling thing about Reed Callahan was not how much power he had. It was how carefully he refused to use it against him. The next morning, Gavin found Reed waiting in a private office overlooking the Chicago River, 3 folders arranged across the table, and 2 cups of coffee beside them. Reed had remembered how Gavin took his coffee after hearing him mention it once the night before. Black, with a little cream and no sugar. Gavin noticed, but said nothing. He lowered himself into the chair nearest the end of the table, rested his graphite forearm crutch within reach, and opened the first folder. For nearly an hour, the room remained quiet except for turning pages and the distant hum of traffic 30 floors below. Reed did not stand over Gavin's shoulder. He worked from the opposite side of the table, occasionally answering a question, never explaining something Gavin had not asked him to explain. The absence of condescension made it easier to think. Here, Gavin said finally. He slid a statement toward Reed. North Meridian received $48,000 on October 6th. 2 days later, Whitaker Distribution paid Lakefront Freight almost the same amount for equipment transportation. Reed studied the page. The shipment existed. The shipment did. The price did not. Gavin pulled another invoice from the second folder. Same route, same weight, same distance 3 months earlier. It cost less than half that. Reed's eyes sharpened. Gavin continued. And this address belongs to both companies. Different suite numbers. One says Suite 200. The other says Suite 200A. I checked the building months ago. There is no 200A. Reed looked up. You checked? Gavin shrugged slightly. I was curious. You were investigating. I was filing paperwork, according to my brother. A faint movement touched the corner of Reed's mouth. Gavin noticed that too. He returned to the records before the moment could become something he did not know how to name. Another pattern emerged 20 minutes later. 3 vendors. Repeating transfers. Payments moving through Whitaker distribution shortly after funds arrived from companies connected to Reed's logistics network. Gavin felt his stomach tighten as the pattern became impossible to dismiss. This was not bad bookkeeping, he said. No, Reed replied. It was designed to look like bad bookkeeping. Gavin leaned back, staring at the numbers. Memories began rearranging themselves. Daniel closing his laptop whenever Gavin entered the office. His father asking why Gavin cared about vendor accounts. The sudden password change. Then, 3 weeks later, the first conversation about the Callahan debt. They knew I had noticed, Gavin said. Reed did not offer false comfort. That appears likely. So the debt was real. Yes. But giving me to you was not simply payment. Reed was silent. Gavin looked at him. They wanted me removed. That is what the records suggest. The truth hurt differently than Gavin expected. Being considered useless had wounded him for years. Discovering that his family had actually feared his usefulness was worse because it meant every insult might have served a purpose. Keep Gavin uncertain. Keep Gavin dependent. Keep Gavin away from anything important enough to expose them. He stared at his hands until the anger became something steadier. I made copies. Reed's attention sharpened immediately. Of what? Vendor statements, transfer records, handwritten account numbers. Not everything. Where are they? Gavin hesitated. Inside an old bookkeeping textbook in my bedroom. Reed did not immediately suggest sending someone to retrieve them. Do you want them recovered? Yes. Then we can have your attorney arrange access. Gavin looked up. My attorney? Not mine. Yours. Reed slid a business card across the table. Independent counsel. No financial relationship with me or my companies. You can choose someone else if you prefer. Gavin picked up the card. The distinction mattered. Reed seemed determined to build exits into every offer he made. Before Gavin could respond, the phone from the guest's suite vibrated against the table. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. Gavin let it ring. Seconds later, a message arrived. Dad is ready to forgive yesterday. Come home and bring back anything you copied from the company. Gavin read it twice. Reed did not lean over or ask what it said. Gavin turned the phone toward him voluntarily. Reed read the message, then looked at Gavin. That answers one question. Gavin felt cold despite the warm office. They know about the copies. Yes. Another message appeared. We can still fix this before you make everything worse. Gavin stared at those words and suddenly understood what had been wrong with his family's story from the beginning. They had claimed he was too limited to matter, too dependent to make decisions, too insignificant to belong anywhere except where they placed him. Yet now they were afraid of a folder hidden inside his bedroom. Gavin locked the phone and set it down. They did not sell the weakest person in the family, he said quietly. Reed held his gaze. Gavin straightened in his chair. They tried to get rid of the only person who noticed what they were doing. By early afternoon, Gavin had stopped expecting his family to wait. The first sign came when the private office phone rang and Reed answered with a quiet yes. His expression did not change, but something in his posture became more precise. He listened for several seconds, then looked at Gavin. Your father and Daniel are downstairs. Gavin felt his stomach tighten. Already. They asked to see you. Reed set the receiver down. You do not have to meet them. Gavin looked at the folders spread across the table, then at the phone containing Daniel's messages. For years, his first instinct had always been to reduce conflict before it reached anyone else. Agree. Apologize. Make things easier. That instinct rose now, familiar and unwelcome. I want to see them, he said. Reed nodded once. Then we meet them here. Gavin stood, settling his hand around the graphite grip of his forearm crutch. Reed moved toward the door, then slowed to match Gavin's pace without mentioning it. The gesture was so natural now that Gavin almost missed it. His father and Daniel were waiting in the same private room where everything had begun. His father remained standing when Gavin entered. There you are, he said. Get your things. We are going home. Gavin stopped several feet away. Daniel's eyes moved briefly to Reed, then back to Gavin. You have made this much worse than it needed to be. Reed stepped slightly forward. It was instinctive, Gavin realized. Protective. The broad line of his shoulders shifted between Gavin and the Whitakers before he seemed to catch himself. Gavin's father noticed too. This is a family matter. Reed's voice stayed calm. You stopped treating it like one when you attempted to use him as collateral. We made a mistake, his father said. We are correcting it. He looked at Gavin. Come home. We can forget all of this. Gavin almost laughed at the word forget. Forget the packed bag. Forget the contract. Forget the records. Forget that the moment he became inconvenient, his family had tried to remove him from his own life. Daniel stepped closer to the table. You do not understand what you saw in those accounts. Then explain it, Gavin said. Daniel hesitated. Gavin continued. Explain North Meridian. Explain Lakefront Freight. Explain why my access disappeared after I asked questions. His father's voice hardened. Enough. You are confused, and Mr. Callahan is encouraging this. Reed shifted forward another half step. Gavin felt the old relief of having someone stronger between him and the pressure. Then Reed did something unexpected. He stepped aside. Not away. Beside him. Tell them yourself, Reed said. Gavin looked at him. Reed's expression was steady, unreadable to anyone who did not know him. Gavin was beginning to know him. He understood the message. I will stay. I will not speak for you. Gavin turned back to his family. His father waited with the same certainty he had worn Gavin's entire life, as if resistance was only temporary confusion. Gavin planted the crutch firmly against the floor and straightened. I am not going home. Silence followed. His father blinked. Do not be ridiculous. I am not. You cannot manage by yourself. The sentence struck an old bruise, but it no longer controlled him. You spent years telling me that because it made every decision easier for you. Daniel shook his head. No one was controlling you. Gavin looked at him. You packed my bag without asking me. Daniel said nothing. Gavin felt his voice growing calmer. You removed my access when I noticed the accounts. You brought me here without telling me why. You offered my future to someone else and expected me to stay quiet because that is what I have always done. His father turned toward Reed. You have filled his head with this. Gavin answered before Reed could. No. He is the first person who stopped filling my head with decisions and asked me to make one. Reed remained silent beside him. The room seemed to shift around that silence. Gavin's father finally looked at him differently. Not as the son who needed managing. Not as the burden who could be moved wherever convenient. As someone whose answer had become impossible to ignore. I will not return to that house, Gavin said. My attorney will arrange access to my belongings. Anything involving the company goes through legal counsel from now on. His father stared at him. Your attorney? Gavin thought of the business card Reed had placed on the table that morning. Mine, he said. Daniel's expression tightened. You are making a serious mistake. Gavin looked at him without lowering his eyes. Maybe, but it will be my mistake. Reed's gaze shifted toward Gavin, and for the first time that day, the controlled severity in his face softened into unmistakable respect. Gavin realized then that Reed had not rescued him from this confrontation. He had done something more important. He had stayed close enough for Gavin to feel safe and far enough away for the victory to belong entirely to him. The Whitakers left without another word that Gavin cared to remember. After the door closed, the room felt larger, almost unfamiliar without their expectations filling every corner. Gavin remained standing for a moment, one hand resting on the graphite grip of his forearm crutch, while Reed gathered the financial folders from the table. You handled that well, Reed said. Gavin looked at him. I nearly changed my mind 3 times. That does not make the decision less yours. The answer stayed with Gavin through the afternoon. They returned to the records, but something between them had shifted. Reed still kept his distance, still asked before moving anything within Gavin's reach, still treated every choice as Gavin's to make. Yet the quiet between them no longer felt formal. It felt familiar. Over the next several days, that familiarity grew in small ways. Reed remembered which chair gave Gavin the most room for his left leg. Gavin learned that Reed drank his coffee too hot and forgot about it whenever he concentrated. Reed stopped scheduling meetings in rooms that required long walks through the building. Gavin noticed and said nothing. One evening, after they had spent hours reviewing shipping records, Gavin realized Reed had moved a side table closer so Gavin would not have to reach for his crutch when he stood. It was such a minor adjustment that no one else would have noticed. Gavin did. That was what frightened him. Not Reed's reputation. Not the organization around him. The dangerous thing was how quickly Gavin had begun to recognize care when it came without conditions. He had spent his entire life believing affection was something he had to earn by being useful, quiet, agreeable, easy to manage. Reed made no such demand, yet Gavin was still helping him unravel a financial scheme that could affect several businesses. The contradiction began to bother him. Late one night, Gavin closed the final ledger and looked across the office. If I stop helping tomorrow, what happens? Reed lifted his eyes from the report in front of him. You stop. That's simple. Yes. And the debt? Reed went still. Gavin saw the answer before he heard it. Your family's business debt is separate from you. But they brought me here because of it. They did. And I am still here because of everything that followed. Reed studied him carefully. Do you think you owe me? Gavin hated how long it took to answer. I do not know. Reed closed the report. Then I have allowed this to remain unclear for too long. The next morning, 2 envelopes waited beside Gavin's coffee. One contained formal confirmation from Callahan Legal Counsel that every clause attempting to assign Gavin's residence, labor, repayment obligations, or personal status to the Whitaker debt was void and unenforceable. The second contained payment for the consulting work Gavin had already completed, calculated at a rate higher than he expected. Beneath both documents was the business card of the independent attorney Reed had mentioned before, along with a handwritten note stating that Gavin was free to retain her, choose someone else, or use no attorney at all. Reed entered several minutes later. Gavin held up the documents. You did this because of what I asked last night. I did it because you should never have had to ask. Gavin looked down at the payment statement. This is too much. It is market rate for specialized forensic review. You could have paid less. I could have done many things. Reed stopped across from him. I chose not to. Gavin looked at the release again. And if I leave today? Reed's face remained composed, but something in his eyes changed. Then you leave today. You would not ask me to stay? A pause. I want you to stay. The honesty of it caught Gavin off guard. Reed continued, quieter now. But wanting you is not the same as having a right to keep you. Gavin felt something tighten in his chest. What if I stay because I want to? Then I will believe you only because I know you can walk away. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Gavin looked around the office that had become strangely comfortable, at the folders they had worked through together, at the man who had never once demanded gratitude for doing what should have been basic decency. Then Gavin understood what he needed to do. If he stayed now, some part of him would always wonder whether freedom had been real or only theoretical. That afternoon, he packed the same small overnight bag he had arrived with. Reed did not argue. He walked with Gavin to the elevator, matching his pace without reaching for him. When the doors opened, Gavin turned. I do not know where this goes from here. Reed gave a single nod. Neither do I. That does not bother you. It does. Gavin almost smiled. You hide it well. I have practice. The elevator waited. Gavin stepped inside, then looked back at Reed. For the first time since they met, there was nothing connecting them except what either man might choose next. No debt, no contract, no obligation. Reed held his gaze and said, build something that belongs only to you. The doors began to close. Gavin stood alone with his bag, his crutch, his payment, and the strange ache of leaving the first place where no one had tried to decide his future. As the elevator descended, he realized freedom did not always feel like relief. Sometimes it felt like walking away from the one person you secretly hoped would still be there if you chose to return. 3 weeks later, Gavin had learned that independence was made of small things no one else could see. It was choosing an apartment in Lakeview because the elevator worked reliably and the hallways were wide enough for him to move without turning sideways. It was arranging the furniture himself, placing his graphite forearm crutch beside his desk instead of wherever someone else thought it belonged. It was buying groceries without explaining the cost, answering messages only when he wanted to, and building a work schedule around his own energy instead of someone else's expectations. The consulting payment from Reed covered his deposit and gave him breathing room, but Gavin refused to let that money become the foundation of everything. Within days, he found his first bookkeeping client through a neighborhood business group. A second came through a tax preparer who needed help untangling vendor records. By the end of the second week, Gavin had enough work to fill most mornings and enough confidence to stop checking his phone every time it remained silent. Reed had not called. Not once. At first, Gavin told himself he was relieved. Then he told himself Reed was respecting the choice he had made. Both things were true, but neither explained the ache that appeared every evening when the city grew quiet. Gavin missed the way Reed listened without interrupting. He missed the dry comments delivered with a perfectly serious face. He missed the strange comfort of sitting across from someone who never treated silence like a problem that needed fixing. Most of all, he missed being seen without being managed. His attorney handled the Whitaker records through legal channels, and investigators recovered the materials from the house without requiring Gavin to return. His father called twice. Daniel sent 4 messages. Gavin answered none of them. For once, his life did not collapse because he refused to respond. That realization should have been enough. It was not. On the 22nd evening after he left Callahan Club, cold rain returned to Chicago. Gavin stood beneath the awning outside the entrance and watched headlights slide across the wet street. The symmetry was almost ridiculous. The first time he had come here, his family had brought him with a packed bag and a decision already made. Tonight, he had taken the train downtown, walked 3 blocks at his own pace, and arrived carrying nothing but a slim folder under one arm. He almost turned around. Then he remembered Reed's words. Build something that belongs only to you. Gavin had done that. Now whatever came next could belong to him too. He opened the door. The staff recognized him, but asked no unnecessary questions. A receptionist told him Reed was upstairs. Gavin rode the elevator alone. When the doors opened, he found the private office exactly as he remembered it. Dark wood, warm lamps, rain tracing the windows. Reed sat at the long table with several reports spread before him. He looked up. For the first time since Gavin had met him, complete surprise crossed his face. It disappeared quickly, but not before Gavin saw it. Gavin. His name sounded careful. Gavin moved across the room and placed the folder on the table. Your accounting department still has a problem. Reed looked at the folder, then at him. You came back to criticize my accounting department? Partly. Something almost like a smile touched Reed's mouth. Gavin opened the folder. Harbor Street Freight Insurance is being categorized incorrectly. It is not fraud. It is just expensive incompetence. Reed glanced through the first page. You found this how? A client authorized me to review related public filings and shipping records. Reed looked up again. You have clients. Gavin could not stop the small note of pride in his voice. 3. That is good. It is. Silence settled between them, but this time Gavin did not hide inside it. Reed closed the folder. You did not need to bring this personally. I know. You could have emailed it. I know. Reed studied him. Then why are you here? Gavin had rehearsed several clever answers on the train. None survived the moment. He tightened his hand around the grip of his crutch and chose the simplest one. Because I missed you. Reed went very still. Gavin continued before fear could make the decision for him. I needed to leave. I needed to know I could live somewhere else, work somewhere else, and make choices without wondering whether I was only doing what someone powerful wanted. Reed listened without moving. And can you? He asked. Gavin nodded. Yes. Then why come back? Gavin looked toward the rain beyond the windows, then met Reed's eyes again. Because being able to live without someone is not the same as wanting a life without them. The composure in Reed's face softened, almost imperceptibly. Are you certain this is your choice? Gavin smiled. That is the whole reason I am standing here. Reed rose slowly, but did not come closer. What do you want? Gavin had not expected the question to feel so familiar. This time, answering it did not frighten him. Dinner, he said. Reed blinked. Dinner. Somewhere public. Somewhere with good food and terrible bookkeeping. Reed's smile finally appeared, restrained but real. I know a place. Gavin turned toward the elevator. Reed came around the table and stopped beside him, matching his pace without reaching for him. As they walked out together, Gavin understood the difference completely. The first time he had entered this building, someone else had chosen where he would go. This time, every step belonged to him. 1 year later, Gavin stood in the same private room where his future had once been discussed without his permission, and almost everything about the place felt different because he was different. The walnut table remained where it had always been. The tall windows still overlooked the Chicago River, and the city lights still reflected against the glass, but Gavin no longer felt like a guest in someone else's decision. His forensic bookkeeping practice had grown from 3 clients to a small, but steady business with 2 employees and more work than he could comfortably accept. He had kept his Lakeview apartment for most of the year, then moved only when he decided he wanted a larger place with better workspace and a quieter view. Reed had offered opinions when Gavin asked and kept them to himself when Gavin did not. The legal proceedings involving Whitaker distribution had mostly been resolved through attorneys and the courts. The disputed accounts had been examined, the business had been reorganized, and Gavin's father and Daniel no longer had any authority over his finances or career. Gavin had spoken to his father once. The conversation lasted less than 15 minutes. There were apologies, explanations, and a request to begin again. Gavin listened, then told him calmly that forgiveness did not automatically restore access to his life. That answer had taken years to learn. Tonight, Reed had asked Gavin to meet him at Callahan Club after work. Gavin arrived 4 minutes early, his graphite forearm crutch moving in the familiar rhythm beside him as he crossed the room. Reed entered moments later wearing a charcoal suit beneath a black wool coat, his dark hair slightly disturbed by the cold wind outside. "You are early," Reed said. Gavin glanced at the clock. "By 4 minutes. Unacceptable." Gavin smiled. "You will recover." Over the past year, their relationship had grown without contracts, deadlines, or dramatic promises. It had grown through dinners after long workdays, coffee on Sunday mornings, quiet disagreements, shared jokes, and hundreds of small choices neither man was forced to make. Reed learned that Gavin hated being interrupted when he was concentrating. Gavin learned that Reed reorganized bookshelves when stressed. Reed never reached for Gavin's crutch without permission. Gavin never mistook Reed's silence for indifference anymore. Tonight, however, something about Reed felt different. He crossed to the walnut table and stopped beside it. There were no financial folders waiting there. No legal documents. No debt statements. Only a small dark box. Gavin stared at it. Reed. Reed looked almost perfectly composed, which meant Gavin knew him well enough to recognize the tension underneath. "I have carried this around for 19 days, Reed said. "Apparently I can handle acquisitions, negotiations, and regulatory hearings more easily than one personal question." Gavin felt his pulse quicken. Reed opened the box. Inside was a simple platinum ring, understated and precise. He did not take it out. He did not reach for Gavin's hand. "The first time you stood in this room," Reed said, "someone else tried to decide what your future would be." Gavin looked at him silently. "I have spent the last year trying to make sure I never become another person who does that." "You have not," Gavin said. Reed's expression softened. "I still need to ask." He drew a measured breath. "I do not want someone who stays because leaving feels impossible. I do not want gratitude mistaken for love. I want the man who built his own life and came back anyway." Gavin's throat tightened. Reed looked directly into his eyes. "Would you choose me again?" Gavin thought about the first night, the packed bag, the contract, the unlocked door, the apartment he had chosen for himself, the business he had built, and the rainy evening when he walked back into this building because he wanted to. Every important moment had led him toward the same truth. Freedom had not taken Reed away from him. Freedom had made loving Reed real. Gavin stepped closer. "I already did." For 1 second, Reed closed his eyes, and the controlled man Gavin had first met disappeared behind something deeply human. When he looked at Gavin again, Gavin held out his hand. Only then did Reed take the ring from the box and slide it onto his finger. Months later, people still described Gavin as the person Reed valued above anything else. Gavin no longer disliked the idea. He understood the difference now. He was not valuable because someone had paid for him. He was not important because someone powerful had chosen him. He was important because he had learned to choose himself first. On a clear winter evening, Gavin stood beside Reed at the windows of their home, his crutch resting within easy reach and the platinum ring catching a thin line of city light. Reed stood beside him, not in front of him, not guiding unless Gavin asked. Gavin looked out over Chicago and thought about how strange it was that happiness had never arrived as rescue. It had arrived as freedom, respect, meaningful work, a home he had chosen, and one quiet alpha who understood that love only mattered when the door remained open. Gavin reached for Reed's hand. Reed looked at him. Gavin smiled. This time, staying was entirely his choice.